The flashing blue and red lights painted the deserted street in stark, unsettling strokes, illuminating a scene that whispered of injustice. A black woman, pressed against the cold metal of a patrol car, her calm eyes a stark contrast to the officer's simmering contempt. In that charged silence, a question hung heavy in the air. In the face of perceived authority, where does true power lie? This is the story of Naomi Carter, a woman whose quiet strength ignited a battle for truth against a system poised to silence her. The darkness descended upon the neighborhood as the dim streetlights cast weak streaks of light. The wailing of police sirens shattered the silent night, and right in the middle of the deserted road, a black woman was pressed down against the hood of a patrol car. Naomi Carter felt the cold metal against her cheek, her breathing rapid, yet her eyes remained eerily calm. Officer Daniel Briggs, a tall white man, tightened his grip on her wrist, his leather gloves pressing hard into her skin, leaving burning red marks. "Who do you think you are to be asking questions?" he whispered near her ear, his voice dripping with sarcasm and barely concealed contempt. Naomi did not answer. She simply closed her eyes, feeling the weight pressing down on her back like an invisible boulder she had long been accustomed to carrying throughout her life. "People like you need to know their place," he continued, his voice lower this time, but no less filled with hostility. The scattered crowd on the sidewalk stood frozen, some covering their mouths, others silently turning away as if unwilling to be involved. The night wind blew through, swirling dry leaves across the empty street. A young man stood nearby, gripping his phone tightly, silently recording the entire scene unfolding before him. His eyes flickered with hesitation, but his fingers remained steady on the record button, unwilling to miss a single moment. Briggs shoved Naomi forcefully, causing her to momentarily lose her balance before he tightened the handcuffs further, emphasizing his absolute control. Naomi bit her lip to suppress the pain, but she did not groan or beg. Her eyes showed no panic, no plea for help from those around her. Briggs leaned in closer, whispering one last time, this time without bothering to hide his satisfaction. "No one can help you." Naomi slowly turned her head, her dark eyes, deep like a bottomless abyss, locking onto his gaze for a split second. Briggs' expression stiffened, but within a second, he let out a short laugh, more condescending than ever. "Get in the car," he ordered, yanking Naomi toward the back door of the patrol vehicle. This time, Naomi did not resist, did not struggle. She simply walked with her back straight, as if she was not being overpowered by his strength. Across the street, a man in a hoodie kept his head low, clutching his phone tightly to his chest, his eyes calculating, the video being recorded carefully, ensuring not a single detail was missed. Briggs opened the car door, placing his hand on Naomi's head to force her inside, then slammed the door shut without another glance at her. He turned back to his fellow officers, exchanging a few words with indifference, as if he had just apprehended a dangerous criminal and not a woman merely standing on the sidewalk. Naomi sat silently inside, the flashing blue and red lights casting flickering streaks across her face. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, not out of fear, but because she knew her real battle was only just beginning. In another corner, a young man reviewed the footage he had captured, his expression serious. He scrolled quickly through the frames, stopping at the scene where Briggs leaned close to Naomi, his voice coming through clearly, "People like you need to know their place." A cold chill ran down the videographer's spine, and he knew he had just captured the most crucial evidence. Inside the police car, Briggs glanced at Naomi through the rearview mirror, his eyes sharp and intimidating, but Naomi did not slump her shoulders or show any sign of submission. She remained sitting straight, her face revealing nothing but composure. One of her wrists had begun to go numb from the tight handcuffs, but she did not let a hint of weakness show. Her calmness unsettled Briggs, and he gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary, as if trying to prove that he still had complete control. But Naomi knew better than anyone. True power did not belong to the one who wore the cuffs, but to the one who had the truth on their side. As the police car merged into the traffic of the city streets, The atmosphere grew heavier than ever. The street lights flashed past briefly, illuminating Naomi's serene face before the darkness swallowed everything once more. Briggs drove toward the station, fully convinced that he had won. He had no idea that the truth had been captured, and a storm was waiting for him ahead. When truth is distorted and justice is hidden, who will rise to reclaim fairness? This is the story of a woman who refuses to be subdued. If you believe justice always needs a voice, hit subscribe to join us in exposing the gripping truth. Thank you for supporting the channel. The sound of the gavel striking the bench echoed decisively, bringing an immediate silence over the room. State versus Naomi Carter. The judge's voice resonated through the vast courtroom. A cold draft slipped through the window crevice, unsettling the already heavy atmosphere. The public seating was packed, some scribbling notes, others whispering among themselves. In the center of the room, Officer Daniel Briggs sat at the witness stand, his shoulders squared, his sharp gaze scanning the room as if he were utterly confident in what he was about to say. Opposite him, Naomi Carter sat quietly, her back straight, hands clasped together in front of her. Her face betrayed no emotion, but her eyes were different, a strange calmness, as if she were waiting for something. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed gray suit, rose and stepped into the center of the room. He cleared his throat slightly to ensure all eyes were on him before speaking in a formal tone. Your Honor, we are here today to prosecute the case of Naomi Carter, a defendant charged with resisting arrest and assaulting a law enforcement officer in the line of duty. The accusations rang out clearly, firmly, prompting nods of agreement from several in the room. The prosecutor paused briefly before continuing. According to the official report, the defendant not only refused to cooperate with law enforcement, but also attempted to seize Officer Briggs' weapon, forcing the officer to subdue her with necessary force to maintain order. These words sounded like an indictment, sealing Naomi's guilt even though she had yet to utter a single word in her defense. Briggs cleared his throat lightly, projecting an air of composure, but also authority, as if he were delivering an undeniable truth. She was aggressive from the start, he said, his eyes sweeping across the jury, searching for agreement. I was patrolling as usual when I saw the defendant loitering outside a closed storefront, displaying suspicious behavior. He leaned back slightly, appearing relaxed but brimming with confidence. I approached her to ask some questions, but immediately she became confrontational. I was simply following protocol, but she refused to comply, loudly challenging my authority. The prosecutor nodded, his gaze sharp as he pressed deeper into the issue. So, in your view, what did Miss Carter do before you decided to place her under arrest? A simple question, but one carrying significant weight in this situation. Briggs did not need much time to respond. He had rehearsed these words more times than he had likely recalled the actual event. She refused to provide identification when asked, raised her voice in defiance, even pointed a finger in my face. He deliberately emphasized his words, painting a vivid image of defiance in the jury's minds. When I instructed her to turn around for a pat-down, she jerked her arm away and struggled, deliberately resisting my commands. He paused to glance around the room, noting the subtle nods of agreement, exactly the reaction he was aiming for. At that point, I had no choice but to restrain her for safety. Briggs continued, his voice steady but carrying an underlying veiled threat. During the altercation, she reached toward my gun belt, deliberately attempting to seize my weapon. If I had not reacted in time, there could have been casualties. His words drew sharp breaths from some in the audience, thickening the tension in the room. The image of a woman attacking a police officer and trying to grab his firearm was being perfectly etched into the minds of those watching. The prosecutor nodded approvingly. So, in your professional opinion, was she a legitimate threat at that moment? Briggs did not hesitate. Absolutely. She was not only defiant but also hostile, forcing me to act swiftly to control the situation. His tone did not waver in panic or concern, but carried the confidence of a man who believed he had complete control of the narrative. Members of the jury exchanged glances. Some tilted their heads, Others gave slight nods. A few furrowed their brow in thought. A brief silence fell over the room as everyone processed the testimony. The prosecutor stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, looking toward the jury before slowly turning his attention back to Naomi. Naomi remained seated, silent, offering no rebuttal, no defense. She did not interrupt, did not interject to defend herself, did not even show an expression of being affected by what had just been said. That only made the courtroom's atmosphere even more tense. Those present, whether they believed or doubted, were all waiting for some kind of reaction from her. But Naomi said nothing. Briggs stared at Naomi for a long moment, as if expecting her to snap, to react, to damage her own credibility, but she did not. Her gaze remained unwavering, neither resisting nor betraying a single flicker of fear. That unnerved Briggs slightly, though he quickly masked it with a smug, self-satisfied smile. The courtroom descended into silence, broken only by the faint scratching of the court stenographer's pen and the quiet murmurs of the onlookers. The prosecutor returned to his desk, nodding in approval at Briggs before looking toward the judge. "Your Honor, I believe Officer Briggs' testimony has made it clear that the defendant resisted and posed a direct threat to law enforcement. We trust that the evidence will substantiate this claim." The tension in the room peaked. The entire courtroom seemed to have been swept up in Briggs' testimony. Some looked at Naomi with suspicion. Others appeared nearly convinced by the officer's narrative. At this moment, everything seemed to be against Naomi, and Briggs knew it. He held his head high, his eyes gleaming with absolute confidence. He believed he had the situation entirely in his grasp. But Naomi remained silent, betraying nothing behind those calm eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. The story is just beginning. Stay tuned for more shocking twists and intense moments as the fight for justice unfolds. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Marcus Taylor stood up, adjusting his slightly loose tie before stepping forward. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the heavy atmosphere in the courtroom. This was one of the biggest cases he had ever handled, and his opponent was a powerful police officer protected by the system. But despite his lack of experience, he had something Briggs did not: passion and a belief in justice. He walked to the front, his eyes never leaving Briggs, who remained seated at the witness stand with an unsettlingly calm expression, with a slight, knowing smile. Marcus spoke, his voice firm yet sharp. "Do you have any evidence besides your own words?" The courtroom fell into silence. Briggs looked at Marcus with a hint of irritation, but he quickly regained his usual confidence. He leaned back slightly, as if the question wasn't worth answering. "She was uncooperative," he said coldly. "I asked her to provide identification, but she refused, just standing there looking at me with a defiant attitude. She didn't respect my authority." Marcus nodded slightly, jotting it down in his file, though in reality, he didn't need to write it down. He had heard this kind of answer too many times before in cases like this. "She just stood there." Marcus pressed, emphasizing the words. Briggs scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she questioned me in return. I took that as a sign of noncompliance, so I had to take control of the situation." Marcus took a slow breath, letting his gaze sweep across the jury as if he wanted them to feel the absurdity in Briggs' response. He flipped a page of his file, then stopped, his voice lower but still sharp. "So according to you, standing on a sidewalk and asking why someone is being stopped is enough to be arrested?" Marcus spoke slowly, deliberately, leaving the question hanging in the air. Briggs smirked, shaking his head. "I didn't say that," he replied, but there was hesitation in his voice. "I only said she was being resistant when I tried to pat her down. She didn't cooperate. She even pulled her hand away when I touched her." Marcus caught on to that immediately. "So did Miss Carter attack you? Or did she simply pull her hand away from your touch?" Briggs fell silent for a second, then answered, "She resisted, and I saw that as a potentially dangerous action." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes no longer carrying the hesitance of a young lawyer, but the confidence of someone who knew he was getting closer to the truth. "Then, Officer Briggs, let me ask you again. Do you have any evidence besides your own words?" Once again, The air in the courtroom grew more tense than ever. Some members of the jury exchanged knowing glances. Briggs pressed his lips together, but then let out a laugh, his face full of arrogance. "I don't need any other evidence," he said slowly, each word meant to be etched into everyone's mind. "I'm a police officer." Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if he had been waiting for that response. The jury members began exchanging doubtful looks, while some spectators in the gallery shook their heads subtly. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone in the room to absorb the sheer audacity of Briggs' statement. Then he lowered his head, pretending to flip through another page of his file, but in reality, he was letting Briggs sit in that prolonged silence, a tactic designed to make his opponent impatient. And just as he expected, Briggs raised an eyebrow, irritation creeping into his expression. Marcus looked him straight in the eye, his tone sharper. "In other words, you believe that just because you're a police officer, your word automatically becomes the truth?" Some jurors blinked, realizing the weight of that question. Briggs clenched his jaw slightly, no longer as comfortable as before. Marcus smirked, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was calculated. "Ladies and gentlemen," he turned to the jury, his voice slow, deliberate. "We are talking about a case where the only evidence used to convict is the word of Officer Briggs. No police body cam footage, no independent witnesses, no actual signs of assault. Just a woman standing on a sidewalk and asking a question." Briggs inhaled sharply, and for the first time in the trial, he seemed irritated, but he had not lost control yet. He still believed he had the upper hand. "You can twist my words all you want," he said, his tone sharper now. "But the truth is, I had to act to ensure safety." Marcus nodded, not in agreement, but because he had gotten exactly what he wanted. He walked back to his table, set his file down, but before sitting, he spoke one final sentence. "Officer Briggs, one last thing I want to clarify," he said, locking eyes with him. The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence, everyone waiting for the next question, but Marcus said nothing. He stood still, just staring at Briggs, leaving an agonizing pause hanging in the air. Briggs blinked, as if he too was caught off guard by the abrupt silence. Some jurors furrowed their brows, as if they were asking themselves if there was no other evidence. Then why was this officer's word being treated as absolute truth? Marcus didn't need to say anything else. The most important question didn't need to be spoken aloud. It had already echoed in the minds of everyone present in the courtroom. The atmosphere in the courtroom was so heavy it felt like it could be cut into pieces. Every eye was fixed on Naomi Carter, who had remained silent from the beginning, listening to every accusation without rebuttal. But when she finally spoke, her voice was neither shaky nor angry. It was eerily calm. "I did nothing wrong," she said, each word slow and deliberate. The courtroom fell into a brief hush, as if no one had truly expected her to speak with such certainty. Naomi lifted her head, her gaze sweeping across the jury members, unwavering. "I was stopped without cause," she continued, her voice maintaining its steadiness, free of fear or defense. "When I asked why, I was violently arrested." A murmur rippled through the gallery. A few jury members exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by Naomi's composure. Meanwhile, Officer Briggs shifted slightly in the witness chair, his lips pressing into a thin line. There was no anger or defiance in Naomi's voice, just the stark truth laid bare, without embellishment, without the need for emotion to make it more compelling. The prosecutor frowned, visibly displeased that Naomi had spoken without going through her lawyer, but Marcus Taylor, standing right beside her, did not intervene. He knew this was the perfect moment for her to assert herself. A statement coming directly from the accused carried more weight than any legal argument. Naomi glanced at Briggs, but there was no hatred or resentment in her eyes, only an assessing look, as if she were watching a man desperately clinging to his own version of events. "I had no weapon. I made no threatening move. I simply stood there and asked a question." She turned back to the jury, her voice unchanged but carrying undeniable weight. "That day, I wasn't arrested because I did something wrong. I was arrested because I didn't stay silent. A few jury members shifted slightly in their seats, clearly affected by her words. A middle-aged woman blinked, then looked down at her notes, as if trying to reorganize her thoughts. In the gallery, a young man crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze sharp as he looked at Briggs, seemingly reevaluating everything. Briggs remained seated, but the confidence on his face had faded slightly. A faint smirk flickered across his lips, but he said nothing, perhaps realizing that anything he uttered now could backfire. Marcus looked directly at the judge, his voice firm, without hesitation. "We have evidence. Things are heating up. Don't take your eyes off the screen as the truth unravels and justice is put to the test." Thank you for your support. Hit that subscribe button. The prosecutor immediately furrowed his brows, turning to Marcus with a doubtful expression. "What evidence?" he asked, his tone carrying a hint of challenge. But Marcus did not rush to answer. He walked slowly toward the lawyer's table, placing his hand on the stack of files before him. "Your Honor," he continued, maintaining his composure, yet every word carried weight. "This evidence does not just prove that Naomi Carter did not attack the officer. It also exposes multiple inconsistencies in Officer Briggs' testimony." A murmur spread across the courtroom like ripples in water, only to be quickly silenced when the judge raised a hand to restore order. Briggs blinked more frequently than usual, his fingers unconsciously gripping the edge of his chair. For a few seconds, he seemed unsure whether to appear defiant or concerned. Marcus glanced at him briefly, but did not linger. Instead, he focused on continuing his presentation. "The jury has heard Officer Briggs state with certainty that Naomi Carter was the aggressor, that she deliberately resisted and tried to seize his weapon." Marcus paused for a moment, then stepped closer to the center of the courtroom. "But what if we have a video that tells a completely different story?" The air in the room grew heavier than ever. The prosecutor's frown deepened as he turned to Marcus with a mix of skepticism and caution. "What kind of evidence are you referring to?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Marcus did not look away from him. Then calmly but firmly, he pulled a small USB drive from his pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. "Your Honor," he said, his gaze sharp, "this USB contains a video recording of the entire incident, captured by a witness at the scene." His words struck the courtroom like a bomb exploding in the silence. Some in the audience gasped, while others exchanged excited whispers. The judge raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised by the revelation. Briggs blinked rapidly, his hands on his lap tightening into fists. He said nothing, but the change in his expression spoke volumes. Marcus did not need to look at Briggs to know that he was tense. "This video," he continued, his voice low but cutting, "will show who truly violated whose rights. It will verify the facts and allow the jury to make their decision based on real evidence, not just the word of an officer." For the first time in the trial, the prosecutor seemed to lose control of the narrative. He turned to his assistant, whispering urgently, clearly reassessing the situation. Meanwhile, the jury members no longer looked neutral. They were waiting for answers, waiting for the evidence none of them could ignore. A recorded video, something that could clarify the truth more definitively than any testimony. Briggs inhaled slowly, but this time he no longer carried the same confidence as before. A shadow of worry flickered in his eyes, if only for a moment. Marcus looked over at Naomi, who still maintained her calm demeanor, but this time there was a clear spark of hope in her gaze. "We have evidence," Marcus repeated once more, his voice unwavering, "and I believe it will change everything." The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly as the large screen lit up, drawing the full attention of everyone present. The murmurs in the room quickly died down, giving way to absolute silence. Every eye was fixed on the screen where a video began to play. The footage was slightly shaky, clearly recorded on a mobile phone, but the audio was remarkably clear. In the video, Naomi Carter stood still on the sidewalk, her hands resting calmly in front of her. There were no signs of resistance, no gestures of defiance. But what stunned everyone was the way Officer Daniel Briggs approached her with an unfriendly demeanor. Briggs in the video moved quickly, his hand already resting on his belt as if ready to act at any moment. "What are you doing here?" His voice rang out curt, lacking the professionalism expected of a law enforcement officer. Naomi lifted her head, her gaze maintaining its characteristic calm. "I'm just standing here," she said, her voice steady, showing no hint of provocation or disrespect. Briggs did not respond immediately. Instead, he leaned down, staring at her for a long moment, as if searching for a reason to escalate the situation. "Show me your ID," he said, his tone no longer a request, but nearly a command. Naomi blinked, tilting her head slightly, clearly unsure why she was being asked to do so. "What did I do wrong?" she asked, her voice neither raised nor challenging, but Briggs did not like that question. He stepped closer, his body casting a looming shadow over Naomi like an imposing wall. "I asked for your ID," he repeated, his voice now firmer. Naomi did not move. She remained exactly where she stood, but her eyes grew sharper. "I'm not required to show ID unless I have done something wrong," she said, this time her voice slower, clearer. The entire courtroom held its breath, and some members of the jury leaned forward slightly. The video continued, showing Briggs' reaction. He did not answer Naomi's question directly, nor did he provide any legal justification for detaining her. Instead, he suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist. A small stir spread through the courtroom as the screen showed Naomi not resisting, not struggling, only instinctively pulling her hand back. Briggs did not like that. He stepped forward again, this time gripping Naomi's wrist harder, his expression visibly irritated. "You're not cooperating," he said, his voice slightly lower but still audible in the video. Naomi shook her head. "I just want to know why I'm being detained," she said, her voice now softer but still without fear. Another officer appeared in the frame, standing a few feet away but not intervening. Briggs did not answer Naomi's question. Instead, he suddenly shoved her against the nearby police car, causing her body to hit the vehicle hard. A sharp gasp could be heard from the person recording, clearly shocked by the action. "Relax," Naomi said, her voice still unwavering, but Briggs had no intention of stopping. On the screen, his hand tightened around Naomi's wrist, twisting it behind her back with enough force to make her grit her teeth to endure the pain. A few people in the courtroom shuddered as they watched the scene unfold, but the most shocking moment was yet to come. The video continued playing, and then a chilling moment occurred. Briggs leaned in, his lips nearly brushing against Naomi's skin as he whispered, "People like you need to know their place." The air in the courtroom felt drained. No one spoke, no one moved. A heavy silence hung over the room, as if the entire space had frozen the moment the video ended. There were no more arguments, no more subjective statements. The truth was now laid bare before everyone's eyes. The images from the video lingered in the minds of all present, especially Officer Briggs' final words. Briggs went pale, his lips pressed into a tight line, his hands clenched on his lap, fingers stiff as if trying to hold on to something to keep himself steady, but he couldn't. His whole body tensed, his shoulders no longer carrying the confidence they once did. Throughout the trial, he had remained calm, in control, but now, for the first time, he had lost that control. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an anchor, but all he found were cold, skeptical stares from the jury and spectators. In the jury box, a middle-aged man wearing glasses removed them, wiped his forehead, then slowly shook his head. A shyer woman beside him exchanged a look with another juror, doubt clear on their faces. A black man sitting further back crossed his arms, his eyes filled with anger as he glared at Briggs. The jury members who might have once thought this was just another case now saw everything differently. In the audience, quiet murmurs began to spread, disappointed headshakes, piercing gazes directed at the police officer now sitting frozen like a statue. A man in a gray suit bowed his head, fingers interlaced as if deep in thought over what he had just witnessed. An elderly woman raised a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. No one had expected that the officer who was supposed to be maintaining order was in fact the one abusing his power. Marcus Taylor stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before settling on Briggs. He did not speak immediately, allowing the silence to linger, forcing everyone to absorb and process what they had just seen. Then, once he was sure all eyes were on him, he spoke, his voice slow but heavy with weight. "Everything is clear." Marcus's voice rang out, each word like a hammer striking the ground, crushing any lingering doubt. He looked each jury member in the eye, then turned to the judge, the prosecutor, and finally Officer Briggs. Briggs didn't dare meet his gaze. He turned away, eyes fixed on the cold tile floor. Marcus continued, his voice neither raised nor forceful, but carrying a chilling authority. This was not justice being carried out. He paused, letting the words sink in. This was a blatant abuse of power. No one in the courtroom objected. No one could deny what they had just seen. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, lips pressing together as if trying to form a response, but he knew there was no way out. The video had spoken for itself. No argument could excuse what had just been shown. Marcus turned to the jury, his voice unwavering. A black woman stood on a sidewalk and asked a lawful question, and she was shoved into a police car. She did not yell, did not resist, yet she was forced, treated like a threat, and had words whispered into her ear filled with prejudice. He turned his gaze to Officer Briggs, his expression not one of anger, but of contempt. "This was not justice," he repeated, his voice dropping lower. "This was abuse hiding behind a badge." Briggs swallowed hard, but he did not speak. All his life, he had been used to people listening to him, believing his word, but now he knew he could no longer escape the truth. The jury members exchanged glances, their expressions slowly shifting into quiet agreement. A few of them nodded slightly, saying nothing, but their eyes already held the answer. Marcus stepped back, resting his hand on the table. If this video had never been recorded, how many of us would have believed Officer Briggs' testimony? He didn't need anyone to answer because he knew they all understood. Naomi Carter remained seated at the defense table, her expression calm, but this time in her eyes, there was a new light, no longer one of endurance, but of belief that justice could prevail. Marcus Taylor stepped forward slowly, his shoes making faint echoes on the hardwood floor of the courtroom. No one spoke, no one moved. Everyone held their breath, waiting for what was about to happen. Briggs sat in the witness chair, his hands gripping the edges tightly, his gaze visibly unsettled. He no longer had the arrogant confidence he had displayed earlier. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, and his eyes darted away as if he wished to disappear from this place immediately. But there was no escape for him. Marcus stopped right in front of him, lowering his head slightly, his gaze cold and sharp as a blade. "Officer Briggs." Marcus spoke, his voice low and deliberate, yet carrying an invisible weight that made the air in the room feel even heavier. "Can you explain that statement?" He paused for a moment, then repeated it more firmly, as if each word was meant to pierce straight into Briggs' mind. The words, "People like you need to know their place." What did you mean by that? A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Every eye immediately turned to Briggs. His body stiffened, his jaw clenched slightly, and his eyes blinked more rapidly than usual. His chest rose and fell, not from anger, but from his desperate attempt to control the panic spreading inside him. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, but he didn't dare raise a hand to wipe it away. Briggs began, but his voice was hoarse, lacking the certainty it once carried. He swallowed, his eyes shifting around as if searching for a way out of the question, but there was no escape. "That statement," he continued, his voice now faltering, "didn't mean anything. It was just—" He stopped, closing his eyes for a second before reopening them, trying to regain control of his expression. "I just wanted Miss Carter to follow my orders." Marcus did not break eye contact. "Follow your orders," he emphasized, his voice sharper. By whispering in her ear with a threatening tone like that, Briggs opened his mouth to say something, but this time no words came out. He turned toward the prosecutor as if hoping for some kind of intervention or rescue, but the prosecutor did not look at him. He was staring down at his desk, lips pressed tightly together, his hand gripping a pen as if he were rapidly calculating his next move. The jury members exchanged glances, A few of them had completely changed their expressions. A middle-aged man wearing glasses removed them, placed a hand on his forehead, and shook his head slightly. A young woman crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze cold, no longer neutral. The skeptical looks from before had now turned into expressions of outrage. Marcus continued, his voice never rising, yet the sharpness in each word made it more terrifying than any shouted accusation. Do you know what's most frightening, Officer Briggs? He took a slow step forward. It's not the video. It's not your failed justifications. It's your silence right now, because it proves one thing. You know exactly what you did. Briggs clenched his fists, but he said nothing. He knew that anything he said now would only incriminate him further. The judge, who had remained patient and neutral throughout the trial, finally spoke up. He removed his glasses, placed them on the desk, then turned to the prosecutor. Do you wish to continue with this case? The prosecutor took a deep breath, his expression hesitant, his gaze uncertain as he looked down at the case files before him. Every avenue for his argument had been dismantled, every testimony had been exposed, and there was no longer any foundation to uphold his position. He stared at his desk for a few more seconds, as if battling internally, but then exhaled. No, he said, his voice not loud but enough to echo through the absolute silence of the courtroom. A few deep breaths were heard. Some people nodded slightly. A man in the audience let out a long sigh, his expression showing a hint of relief. A woman on the jury smiled faintly, but it was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of justice finally being restored. Briggs slumped in his seat as if all the energy had been drained from him. There was no longer a path forward for him to uphold his story. He had lost. The journey for justice is far from over. Keep watching as the tension rises and every moment counts. Thank you for being here. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Naomi stood up, preparing to step away from the witness stand, but before she could turn, the steady voice of the judge echoed through the courtroom. Miss Carter, he said, his expression calm but filled with scrutiny. Would you like to say anything before we conclude? The entire courtroom fell silent. Every eye was on Naomi. She paused, turned back, not toward the judge but toward Officer Briggs, who still sat motionless in the witness chair. His face remained pale, sweat glistening on his forehead, his hands clasped tightly together, gripping his knees as if trying to steady his trembling. Naomi didn't need to shout, didn't need to argue. She simply smiled. You picked the wrong person. Those three simple words rang out, yet they carried more weight than any argument or accusation throughout the entire trial. Briggs froze, his breath catching for a brief moment. Some jurors leaned slightly forward as if sensing that this moment wasn't over. Marcus Taylor raised an eyebrow slightly, while the prosecutor sat completely still, unable to predict what was coming next. Naomi slowly raised her left hand to her wrist, where a small but sturdy metal bracelet rested. She unclasped it, her movements deliberate, intentional, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. And then, as the metal came away from her skin, a tattoo was revealed, the emblem of the Navy SEALs. The courtroom held its breath for several seconds. No one moved, no one spoke. The jurors stared with wide eyes, some covering their mouths, others simply gaping as if unable to believe what they were seeing. A police officer seated toward the back took a slow, deep breath, his expression suddenly growing more serious. The prosecutor blinked rapidly, as if trying to confirm whether his eyes were deceiving him. Briggs went rigid, his eyes locked onto the tattoo, and for the first time throughout the entire trial, genuine fear surfaced on his face. His mouth opened slightly as if to say something, but no sound came out. Every word, every argument, every excuse he had used became meaningless in this moment. Naomi said nothing more. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, calm yet commanding, letting the people in the room come to their own realization. The woman they had been judging was far from just an ordinary citizen. She was not weak, not someone to be bullied, not one of the people like you Briggs had so arrogantly assumed her to be. She was a warrior. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted into something entirely different. No longer the tension of conflict, but the weight of truth, an undeniable truth. Marcus Taylor took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping across the entire courtroom, where everyone was still holding their breath at the sight of the Navy SEAL emblem on Naomi Carter's wrist. There were no more whispers, no more skeptical glances. Now, there was only absolute silence, a silence that carried the weight of truth. He took a step forward, standing at the center of the courtroom where all eyes were on him. But he did not look at the judge nor the prosecutor. He looked directly at the jury, the people who now held Naomi's fate in their hands. Then his voice rang out, slow but commanding. Miss Carter is not just an ordinary person. Those words struck like lightning in an already electrified atmosphere. An older man on the jury blinked repeatedly, as if struggling to process what he had just heard. A short-haired woman clenched her hands on her lap, her face deep in thought. A police officer sitting in the back straightened his posture, his expression growing more serious. Marcus paused for a beat, letting his words sink into everyone's minds. Then in a stronger voice, he continued, "She is a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, having served in multiple classified operations." A faint gasp came from someone in the audience. Some jurors glanced at each other. A few widened their eyes, while others tilted their heads slightly, as if trying to confirm they had heard correctly. No one had expected that the woman on trial before them was a high-ranking military officer, someone who had put her life on the line in the most dangerous missions. Briggs was completely paralyzed. If he had been searching for a way to defend himself before, now he had nothing left to say. His eyes were locked onto Naomi's wrist, where the Navy SEAL tattoo was clearly visible. His entire expression was frozen, his jaw clenched, sweat beginning to stream down his temple. For the first time, he truly understood that he had made a grave mistake. The judge, who had remained silent since the video was played, finally spoke. He removed his glasses, set them down carefully on the desk before him, then brought a hand to the bridge of his nose. No one knew what he was thinking, but everyone could see he had reached a decision. He sighed, then slowly lifted the gavel. The court finds the defendant not guilty. The gavel struck decisively, firmly, but no one reacted immediately. For a second, the entire courtroom seemed to empty itself of sound, as if everyone's minds needed an extra moment to fully process what had just happened. Then, as the truth was finally confirmed, a soft sigh of relief emerged from the audience. A woman placed a hand on her chest, closing her eyes briefly as if trying to contain her emotions. A man on the jury nodded slightly, as though a great burden had just been lifted from his shoulders. The prosecutor said nothing. He simply bowed his head, gripping the pen in his hand tightly, but writing nothing more. Briggs still sat there, but he was no longer the man he had been minutes ago. His face was pale, his vacant eyes fixed on the table before him. He knew his career was over, knew that everything he had tried to justify had been erased in mere minutes. Naomi remained standing, her back straight, her expression no longer tense or angry, only the quiet composure of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and had now reclaimed her justice. Briggs sat motionless in the Internal Affairs office, his hands clenched tightly on the table, eyes staring down at the wooden surface as if by looking long enough he could make everything disappear, but nothing could change the reality unfolding before him. The trial was over, but his nightmare had only just begun. In front of him, two Internal Affairs investigators flipped through pages of documents, their eyes cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Officer Briggs," one of them spoke, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made Briggs feel the air grow heavier around him. "We need you to explain some irregularities in your record." Briggs swallowed hard. He had known this was coming the moment the video was made public during the trial. Public outrage exploded. Justice advocates, investigative journalists, and even some officers within the police force began asking questions. Was this truly the first time Briggs abused his power, or was it just the first time he got caught? And now the department was forced to launch an internal investigation, not because they wanted to, but because the pressure from the media and the community was too great to cover up. A thick file was pushed toward him, Inside was not just the case file of Naomi Carter, but also a long list of past complaints that had been filed against him, all of which had either been dismissed or buried. More than a dozen individuals had accused Officer Briggs of excessive force, abuse of power, or discriminatory behavior. One of the investigators tapped the file with the end of his pen, his gaze stern. "We have some questions about these cases, Officer Briggs. Would you like to explain?" Briggs felt a cold sweat run down his spine. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but when he spoke, his voice no longer carried the confidence it once had. "Those cases had no concrete evidence," he said, his voice hoarse. "Anyone can file a complaint against an officer if they're unhappy." The older investigator, his graying hair neatly combed back, smirked faintly, as if he had heard that excuse 1,000 times before. He slid another document toward Briggs. "Then can you explain why all the complainants have one thing in common?" Briggs blinked, his heartbeat quickening. The investigator continued, his tone sharper. "They were all people of color." Silence stretched on. Briggs could feel the tension creeping into every muscle in his body. But he couldn't argue, he couldn't deny it. What had once been concealed was now fully exposed. Outside, the headlines were already flooding the news with shocking revelations. "Officer accused of abuse has a long history of excessive force." Was the Naomi Carter case just the tip of the iceberg? The dark record of Officer Briggs uncovered. Under the weight of media scrutiny and public outrage, the police department was forced to act immediately. The head investigator placed a letter on the table in front of him. The bolded heading at the top read, "Notice of immediate suspension." Briggs opened his mouth to protest, but the gray-haired investigator simply cut him off with a cold nod. "You are suspended from duty, effective immediately." Briggs froze, feeling as if the ground beneath him had collapsed. He wanted to fight back, to say this was a mistake, that he didn't deserve this, but he knew no one was listening anymore. No one was on his side. No one was protecting him. He had lost. The media erupted with headlines, each one more damning than the last. News anchors reported on the scandal with a mixture of outrage and disbelief, while newspaper articles laid out the details of Officer Briggs' misconduct in bold, unrelenting print. "Police officer caught abusing power faces suspension amid widespread investigation," screamed one headline. "How many more victims are out there?" questioned another. Social media platforms flooded with discussions. Videos of the trial went viral, and hashtags like #JusticeForNaomi and #EndPoliceCorruption trended for days. The public reaction was swift and ferocious. Protesters gathered outside police precincts demanding accountability. Community leaders and activists took to the streets, holding signs that read, "No more cover-ups," and "Protect, not oppress." Evening news broadcasts showed crowds chanting, their voices echoing through the city as the movement for justice gained momentum. The outrage wasn't just about Briggs. It was about the entire system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. With pressure mounting, the investigation widened. Briggs' superiors were no longer safe from scrutiny. Internal Affairs began pulling records, looking deeper into past misconduct reports that had been conveniently dismissed. Why had so many complaints against Briggs been ignored? Who had allowed him to stay on duty despite multiple allegations? It became clear that this wasn't just about one corrupt officer. It was about an entire system that had protected him. One name surfaced repeatedly: Captain Douglas Monroe, Briggs' direct superior. Monroe had signed off on multiple reports clearing Briggs of wrongdoing, each case dismissed with vague justifications like insufficient evidence or officer acted within reason. But now, under the public eye, those justifications were no longer enough. Monroe was summoned for questioning, his once solid reputation crumbling under the weight of his complicity. Behind closed doors, officials debated their next moves. The police department issued a carefully worded statement claiming that they took allegations of misconduct seriously and would conduct a full review, but the public wasn't satisfied with words. They wanted action. Meanwhile, members of the jury, now free to speak publicly, faced the reality of how close they had come to making a terrible mistake. One of them, a middle-aged woman with short graying hair, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. "We almost convicted an innocent woman," she admitted, her voice heavy with the weight of that truth. Another juror, a younger man in his 30s, shook his head as he spoke. "We trusted the system," he said. "The system nearly failed Naomi Carter." His words resonated with the growing public sentiment. This wasn't just about one case. It was about how many other cases had gone unnoticed, how many other innocent people had been convicted based on nothing more than an officer's word. The weight of that realization settled over the public like a storm cloud. If it hadn't been for that video, if it hadn't been for Naomi's resilience, she would have been just another statistic, a victim of a broken system that almost swallowed her whole. But this time, the system hadn't won. This time, the truth had come to light, and now there was no turning back. Naomi did not stop. Even after enduring the most harrowing moments of injustice, she rose from the depths of her ordeal with a determination that shone brighter than ever before. In the weeks following the trial, she transformed her personal pain into a powerful force for change, emerging as a steadfast advocate for justice and human rights. With every step she took, she carried the weight of those who had been silenced, and her unwavering resolve became an inspiration for many. Her journey was not just a personal quest for vindication, but a rallying cry for all who had suffered under the yoke of systemic oppression. She traveled from city to city, speaking at conferences, community centers, and universities, where her words resonated like a clarion call for accountability and reform. At every event, Naomi shared her story, leaving behind an indelible impression of resilience and hope. She demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one individual's courage could spark a movement capable of transforming society. Her very presence redefined what it meant to fight for one's rights, and her passion ignited a fire within the hearts of those who listened. With every speech, Naomi proved that silence was no longer an option when confronting injustice. At one of the major human rights conferences held in a grand, sunlit auditorium, Naomi took the stage with a quiet dignity that immediately captured everyone's attention. The room was filled with activists, scholars, and everyday citizens, all eager to hear her speak. And as she stepped into the spotlight, an air of solemn anticipation descended over the audience. Her eyes, deep and steady, swept across the crowd, as if searching for the souls who had long suffered in silence. And in that moment, every person present felt as though they were witnessing the birth of a new era. The backdrop of the stage featured a large banner emblazoned with powerful words of unity and justice, underscoring the profound significance of her message. As Naomi began to speak, her voice was measured yet forceful, resonating with a blend of wisdom and raw emotion that belied the hardships she had endured. She recounted her experiences not as a tale of victimhood, but as a rallying cry to arms against systemic abuse, emphasizing the importance of resilience and collective action. Every word was delivered with such conviction that it was impossible not to be moved by the palpable energy in the room. The audience listened intently, many with tears glistening in their eyes as they recognized parts of their own struggles reflected in her narrative. That day, as she spoke of injustice, hope, and the power of unity, Naomi ignited a spark of determination in every heart present, leaving no one untouched by her message. Her performance was more than a speech. It was an awakening. In subsequent months, Naomi's reputation as a champion of human rights and justice continued to grow, and her schedule became filled with invitations to participate in panels, debates, and roundtable discussions across the nation. She traveled extensively, from bustling metropolitan centers to remote communities where voices had long been marginalized, ensuring that her message reached every corner of society. In every forum, her address was met with rapt attention as individuals who had once felt invisible suddenly found their stories acknowledged and their struggles validated. Naomi's eloquence and calm strength in recounting her own journey made her an emblem of hope for countless people who believed that change was possible. She tirelessly argued that true justice is not something bestowed by fate, but earned through relentless struggle and unwavering commitment to truth. Her speeches were filled with practical insights on how to challenge entrenched systems of power and how communities could mobilize to hold authorities accountable. Each event became a gathering of like-minded individuals, a fertile ground where new ideas for reform were cultivated and future actions planned. Despite the many obstacles she faced, Naomi's spirit never wavered, and her commitment to justice only grew stronger with time. The energy she exuded was contagious, inspiring others to join her in the ongoing fight for a fairer world. With every word, she reminded everyone present that the fight against injustice was a shared responsibility. One crisp autumn evening, Naomi took the stage at a prestigious international human rights summit, where representatives from across the globe had convened to discuss the state of justice in their respective countries. The auditorium was filled with a diverse array of people: activists, lawyers, diplomats, and students, all united by a common belief in the fundamental right to live free from oppression. As she walked confidently onto the stage, a hush fell over the audience, and all eyes turned to her. The subtle lighting and the backdrop adorned with symbols of liberty set the tone for what would be a transformative moment. Naomi began by acknowledging the challenges that lay ahead in the struggle for justice. Yet she quickly shifted the narrative to one of empowerment and collective action. She emphasized that the path to a more just society was forged not by waiting for change to happen, but by actively demanding it, one step at a time. Each sentence she delivered was imbued with the conviction of someone who had fought through the worst of circumstances and emerged victorious. The audience listened spellbound as she detailed the necessity of resilience, the importance of standing together, and the transformative power of unity. Her words resonated deeply with every person present, serving as a reminder that every voice mattered in the fight against injustice. The summit became a vibrant forum of ideas and strategies, fueled by the inspiration that emanated from Naomi's heartfelt address. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Naomi's commitment to championing justice became a defining element of her identity. She began hosting her own series of public discussions and workshops aimed at educating communities about their rights and the mechanisms through which they could demand accountability. Her efforts extended to engaging with grassroots organizations, where she worked side by side with local leaders to address systemic issues and mobilize support for policy reforms. In these intimate settings, her presence was both calming and invigorating. Her deep understanding of the struggles faced by the marginalized resonated with those who had long been silenced by fear and disillusionment. Naomi's approach was methodical and empathetic. She listened intently to every story, every plea for justice, and every cry for help. Her actions underscored her belief that knowledge and empowerment were the key weapons in the battle against corruption and abuse of power. Despite the persistent challenges, she persisted with unwavering determination, driven by the knowledge that her voice could spark change. Her tireless work at these events transformed public opinion, gradually shifting perceptions about the nature of justice in a society that had long been riddled with inequality. In every session, her message was clear. Change was not only possible, but inevitable when people united for a common cause. Naomi's journey eventually culminated in a final monumental event that would mark a turning point in her advocacy career. On a bright, hopeful day, she was invited to deliver a keynote address at a major university renowned for its diverse student body and its commitment to social justice. The auditorium was packed with eager faces, students, professors, community leaders, all gathered to hear from the woman who had become a symbol of defiance against oppression. As she stepped onto the stage, the room burst into spontaneous applause, a heartfelt reaction that reflected the deep admiration and respect that had been earned through years of struggle. Naomi paused for a moment, taking in the energy of the crowd before she began to speak. Her words flowed with a natural cadence, each sentence carefully crafted to resonate with the hopes and dreams of those listening. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and an unmistakable sense of purpose. as if every individual in the room recognized that they were part of something much larger than themselves. In that moment, Naomi was not just a survivor. She was a beacon of inspiration, lighting the way toward a future where justice would prevail. The intensity in her eyes, combined with the power of her convictions, transformed the lecture into an unforgettable rallying cry for change. Every word she uttered was a testament to the idea that the fight for justice was a continuous, collective endeavor that would never be abandoned. The final act of this transformative journey unfolded on a stage that was set not just for a speech, but for a declaration of a new beginning. In the climactic scene, Naomi stood confidently on a brightly lit stage, facing a group of young, vibrant students of color who had gathered to listen to her powerful message. The auditorium was alive with a palpable energy, every face shining with hope and determination, as if they too were ready to take up the mantle of justice. With unwavering poise, Naomi addressed the students directly, her voice ringing clear and strong, transcending any barrier of language or doubt. "Justice is not something that is naturally given," she declared, her tone firm and resolute. "It is something we must fight for with every ounce of our being." Each word resonated deeply, echoing through the vast hall and stirring the souls of every listener. She spoke of the struggle she had endured, of the systemic challenges that many faced, and of the urgent need to stand up against injustice, no matter the cost. Her message was one of empowerment, a call to action that inspired the audience to believe in their own strength and agency. The students listened intently, their eyes fixed on her as they absorbed the depth of her conviction. In that moment, the stage became a symbol of rebirth and resilience, a place where the promise of a just future was nurtured with courage and unwavering spirit. As Naomi continued to speak, her presence seemed to illuminate the entire room, each ray of light symbolizing a new hope for a better tomorrow. The walls of the auditorium, adorned with banners and emblems of past struggles, now shimmered under the glow of her passion and sincerity. Every sentence she uttered was like a rallying cry, urging the young minds before her to rise above despair and fight for what was right. The students, diverse in background yet united by a common desire for change, leaned forward as if to capture every nuance of her message, their faces reflecting determination mixed with the excitement of being part of a movement that promised to dismantle old injustices and build a future founded on equity and respect. Some of them scribbled notes furiously, knowing that these words could very well shape the course of their lives and careers. Others simply sat in awe, absorbing the historic moment as if it were a personal revelation. In that final scene, Naomi's message was clear. The struggle for justice is unending, but every effort, every act of courage brings society one step closer to the truth. Her words were not just an exhortation, but a solemn promise that together they could rewrite the narrative of oppression and pave the way for a more equitable world. The climax of the event arrived as Naomi paused, allowing her profound statement to sink into the hearts of everyone present. "Justice is not something that is naturally given. It is something we must fight for to win," she declared, her voice echoing powerfully throughout the vast auditorium. The audience responded with an overwhelming surge of applause, their claps resonating like the beating of countless hearts unified in purpose. In that electrifying moment, the lights focused solely on Naomi, casting a radiant glow around her as if heralding a new dawn of accountability and courage. The stage was transformed into a beacon of hope, its illuminated platform symbolizing the bright future that awaited if people dared to stand up for what was right. Every clap, every cheer, every tear shed in that hall was a testament to the profound impact of her words. The room pulsed with energy, and for a few timeless minutes, all that existed was the shared dream of a just society where every individual was valued. As the applause reached a crescendo, Naomi stood tall, her eyes reflecting both the struggles of the past and the promise of the future. It was a moment that encapsulated everything she had fought for, a triumphant affirmation that the pursuit of justice was a continuous, collective battle that would never be abandoned. Naomi Carter's story serves as a potent reminder that justice is not a passive state, but an active pursuit. It underscores the critical importance of truth and the power of evidence in dismantling narratives built on prejudice and abuse of authority. The video footage acted as an undeniable witness, exposing the chasm between perceived authority and actual injustice. Furthermore, Naomi's resilience and her transformation from victim to advocate highlight the profound impact one individual can have in challenging systemic oppression and inspiring collective action. Ultimately, her journey emphasizes that true strength lies not in dominance, but in unwavering integrity and the courage to speak truth to power, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The fight for justice is a continuous one, demanding vigilance, courage, and the unwavering commitment to ensure that every voice is heard and every injustice is brought to light. The story of Naomi Carter has reached its conclusion, but its resonance will linger in the minds of each of us. It is not merely a stark indictment of the abuse of power and prejudice, but also a powerful anthem of the strength of truth, perseverance, and the indomitable spirit of an individual. The light of justice, though at times obscured, ultimately triumphed over darkness thanks to the courage of one woman and the timely emergence of irrefutable evidence. Yet, the journey towards a truly just society remains long and arduous. Naomi's story serves as a profound reminder that injustices still persist in the shadows, and the voices of the marginalized continue to be drowned out by indifference. Each of us, regardless of our position, bears the responsibility to carry forward the flame that Naomi ignited. It is the flame of empathy, of compassion, and of an unwavering will to never compromise in the face of wrongdoing. Let Naomi's courage inspire us in our daily lives. Let us learn to listen to the stories that are often overlooked, to dare to speak out when we witness injustice, and to act with fairness and integrity in all circumstances. For justice is not a gift to be bestowed, but an achievement to be fought for and defended relentlessly through the solidarity of an entire community. The story of Naomi Carter has closed this chapter, but it has opened a new one in our awareness of justice and responsibility. Let us collectively write the next chapter, one where such stories become but painful lessons from the past, never to be repeated in the present or the future. May the spirit of Naomi Carter live on, urging us to ceaselessly strive for a better world, a world where all are treated with respect and where true justice prevails.